Dr. Isadora Kwok first saw the plant on a fog-shot Tuesday in late April, growing in an abandoned quarry outside Port Renfrew. It crouched on the shale like something that had been waiting, 6 slender stems topped with tight fist-sized buds the color of silt. Nothing about it looked dramatic. Still, Izzy paused, pack sliding from her shoulder as she knelt. "Not on my list," she murmured, brushing back a strand of wind-tossed hair. The Pacific coast was a velvet murmur behind her, cedar scent mingling with salt. 50 meters inland, however, the quarry floor smelled only of dust. In that grayness, the plant's leaves were unnaturally glossy, as if polished. She took photos, tagged coordinates, and clipped a single leaf for DNA analysis. Routine. A new weed, she assumed. Port Renfrew collected invasives the way tide pools collected glass. Then she hiked out, boots ticking against shale, already thinking of the ferry ride home. 2 hours later, while she was logging samples at the University of Victoria's herbarium, her phone buzzed with an emergency alert. A fisherman had been found in his truck at the same quarry, engine running, exhaust routed by a hose through the cab. Carbon monoxide. A suicide. Izzy froze, a half-labeled vial in one hand. The timestamp on the coroner's estimate, 11:48 a.m., landed within minutes of when she'd knelt beside the unknown plant. A shiver puckered her shoulders. Coincidence, she told herself, finished the label, went back to work. But a week later, something stranger happened. She had transplanted the specimen into a controlled greenhouse bed. The bud stayed closed, neither dying nor opening. Then, on a crisp Monday dawn, Izzy shuffled in with coffee and found all 6 stems crowned by enormous midnight blue flowers. They glowed like wet ink. She exhaled a queasy wow, recorded temperature and humidity, and texted Dr. Marta Alessio, her mentor. The first bloom was time-stamped 0531. At 0604, campus security discovered a grad student, one of their own ecology cohort, on the roof of the chemistry building, swaying on the ledge. They talked him down, but his journal later revealed he had climbed there intending to jump at daybreak. The officer's body cam showed the ledge visit began near 0530. When Izzy heard, the back of her throat went dry. Twice could still be random, she thought, but her pulse said otherwise. She pored over literature. No species matched the leaf venation, the petal microstructure, or the subterranean taproot she later unearthed. Toxins? Alkaloid profile negative. Pollination? None observed. At Edouard's, the petals closed as if stitched shut, leaving her no pollen to sample. Only one feature was reliable. The flowers opened for exactly 2.5 hours, and did so, apparently, when a human within a radius felt death's invitation curling around their psyche. Correlation demanded data, so Izzy built a schedule. Every morning she sat in the greenhouse, notebook ready, measuring angles of light, humidity, soil chemistry. On days the buds stayed dormant, she checked regional police logs. No suicide attempts. On bloom days, she inevitably found at least one. After 12 events, 12 statistics stopped being comfort. She had discovered, or been discovered by, something impossible, an organic early warning system for despair. Yet there was a catch. Genome sequencing, run after hours on university machines, placed the plant's nearest relatives in a remote valley in Sichuan, China. It was unequivocally non-native. Worse, its rhizomes grew aggressively, sending white runners through any soil she provided. She quarantined it in steel tubs, but a single broken segment could spawn a clone. British Columbia's Ministry of Forests had a short phrase for such organisms: invasive species of concern. By law, their directive was eradication. Izzy drove to the ministry office with photographs, tissue samples, and ethanol, and her preliminary paper draft titled Psychotropic Phenology in Unidentified Angiosperm. She'd practiced a restrained pitch in the mirror, trimming any mention of suicide until the final slide. People she knew, disliked being told a plant could sense what therapists sometimes missed. It felt mystical, unscientific. She needed them to hear the data first. The panel assigned to her consisted of 3 bureaucrats and 1 ecologist, Dr. Ahmed Nader. In a windowless meeting room, Izzy clicked through charts: bloom frequency, geographic radius correlation, meteorological controls. When she reached the suicide linkage, silence filled the fluorescent air. Finally, Dr. Nader spoke. "Do you claim causation or merely correlation?" "Correlation, though the strength implies a direct trigger. Some pheromonal chemical from humans, perhaps, undetectable so far. It appears to respond to ideation, not the act itself." One bureaucrat rubbed his temples. "You're suggesting a flower can read minds within 5 kilometers? I'm suggesting the flower reacts to something produced by human metabolism during acute suicidal ideation," Izzy answered. "If we can isolate that signal, we might develop a wearable detector, a public health intervention tool. Or," another said flatly, "we could eradicate an invasive before it blankets the entire province." They asked her to step outside. When called back, she received their verdict: immediate containment and destruction recommended. Too risky. She had 72 hours to comply, after which ministry agents would visit the greenhouse. Izzy drove home in hammered silence. On the passenger seat lay the ministry notice, boldface: non-compliant cultivation subject to penalties. That night she didn't sleep. She kept seeing the fisherman's truck, the grad student's shoes edging the roofline. The plant bloomed. People were saved. Sometimes by chance, sometimes by the compassionate network of friends and first responders. What if she could turn chance into certainty? She imagined sensors wired to the buds, GPS triangulation narrowing the 5-kilometer circle to street blocks, a hotline dispatched before the moment tipped. Lives balanced on that threshold, silent and invisible, until too late. The plant alone whispered a warning. But she also imagined the quarry smothered by blue flowers, native ferns suffocated, soil chemistry altered. Ecological collapse could cost lives too, albeit less visibly. Dawn found her in the greenhouse, laptop open. She drafted 2 emails. One to a mental health nonprofit about a potential collaboration, another to Dr. Nader asking for a reconsideration period. She hit send on the first, hesitated on the second, and instead powered down. The buds were closed. At noon, they remained so. Maybe, she thought, the city was at peace today. She bundled the specimen tubs onto a dolly and wheeled them to the back of her pickup. If she was to decide the plant's fate, she needed seclusion away from labs and bureaucrats, a place to think. She drove north along Highway 19, up Vancouver Island's spine, to an off-grid cottage her parents once used for summer fishing trips. Forest swallowed the narrow road. May sunlight dappled the windshield. Behind her, the tubs thudded with each bump despite the tie-downs, as though the plant objected. At the cabin, she unloaded them onto the mossy deck. A solar battery powered minimal essentials. She rigged sensors anyway. Isolation, yes, but data. Always. The first night the forest rang with barred owl calls. Izzy sat by the wood stove, pages of her field journal catching amber light, grappling with an impossible math. One species' survival versus an unknown count of human lives. Philosophy had never interested her. Now it drenched every scribbled line. Near midnight she stepped outside to breathe cedar-sweet air. Stars looked close enough to pluck, and there, under that astral quiet, she saw something that knocked her heart sideways. The buds yawned open, petals unfolding until the deck gleamed like spilled ink. Someone out there, within 5 kilometers of this remote cabin, was thinking about stepping off life's edge. Izzy's hand trembled around her phone as she opened the local news feed. Nothing. She opened the RCMP dispatch Twitter. No alerts. Of course not. Ideation wasn't public. The nearest settlement was Gold River, A logging town, population 1,300, 5 kilometers, placed half the valley under the plant's radius. She swore softly, pulled on boots, grabbed her first aid rucksack, the one she normally carried on treks. Then she paused. She had location, but no identity, no address. How could she find a thought? Instinct answered, "Go where quiet despair blooms." The mill had laid off dozens last month. Rumor said the bar stayed busy. She locked the cabin, jogged to her truck, and drove. Gold River's single tavern glowed like a low ember. She stepped inside, scanned faces. A couple of older men nursed beers. A bartender wiped glasses. A teenager in a community college hoodie sat alone at a corner table, untouched soda before him. His eyes were hollows. Izzy's pulse kicked. She walked over. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said quietly, "but the kitchen's closed and I missed dinner. Mind if I sit a minute?" He shrugged without looking. She sat. Up close, he smelled of lake water and faint gasoline. Wet cuffs suggested he'd come from the river. Maybe she'd interrupted something already in motion. "I'm Izzy." "Ryan. I used to fish here with my dad," she offered. "I love the silence. Sometimes too much silence can get heavy, though." He blinked, glance flitting toward hers. "Yeah, heavy." The next hour became a delicate bridge of sentences. She didn't mention plants or premonitions. She asked if he liked school, if the layoffs had hit his family. He was first-year forestry, he said, but tuition crushed them after his mom's hours were cut. She saw the story's marrow then, failure, guilt, a ledger of disappointments that convinced him the math of his own life no longer balanced. Outside, across town, her truck sat with the improbable flowers in its bed. She imagined their petals trembling each time Ryan's thoughts sharpened toward finality. She thought of the ministry order, of national parks choked by blue, and knew she would never burn them tonight. Not while she could drive a stranger home. Not while his mother waited up on a living room couch cluttered with overdue bills, eyes swollen with relief when Ryan stepped in. Izzy waited on the porch until the woman mouthed "thank you" through tears. When she returned to the cabin, dawn was lifting pewter shadows off the trees. The flowers shut as she watched. She drafted a new plan. First, she mapped population density around the cabin and leased, with her modest savings, 20 hectares of clear-cut boundary where the plant could not easily leap to wild forest. She built a perimeter of corrugated metal sunk 2 meters deep, lined with root-impervious membrane. Within it, she arranged her tubs in rows. She installed motion cameras, automated watering, solar-powered floodlights for nighttime bloom detection, and a satellite modem feeding a secure server. The plant became a sentinel array. Second, she contacted Paula Duarte, director of the suicide prevention charity she'd emailed. Paula drove out in a muddy Jeep, eyes skeptical. By evening, she stood among the steel tubs watching petals flare at 1914. Her phone buzzed 10 minutes later. A call from the RCMP asking for crisis counselor assistance at a farmhouse 6 kilometers away, not within the radius. Paula frowned. "Too far." "Wrong reading," Izzy said. "The station's in town, base radius from there." Within weeks, Paula's team formed an unofficial protocol. If the array bloomed, they scanned region-specific indicators, ER self-harm admissions, 911 welfare calls, and targeted outreach. They shared nothing about the plant. Confidentiality, Paula said, protected everyone, including the flower. Izzy lived in a limbo of exhilaration and fear. Each bloom pushed them into action. Each action saved someone. Meanwhile, rhizomes pressed against steel. She pruned, burned the trimmings, logged centimeters grown. She told herself the barrier held, but barriers fracture. In early October, after 5 months and 33 interventions, Izzy noticed a slim blue petal lodged between deck boards 10 meters outside the enclosure. Panic sluiced her veins. She dropped to her knees, pried up a board. Beneath, a hair-thin runner coiled like a question mark. Somehow, a fragment hitchhiked on her boot sole, maybe, and sprouted. Invasion had begun. She spent days pulling up plumes of root, burning them in a steel drum, eyes stinging with smoke and doubt. How long until she missed one? How many kilometers before blue devoured green? Her phone chimed. The ministry had scheduled its compliance inspection for November 3rd. She saw herself fined, her research impounded, the array bulldozed, and, like a ripple, saw Paula's hotline darken, lives dangling again. Izzy closed her eyes, palms over ears, but no silence followed. It was the plant's whisper now, the moral tinnitus of knowledge. November sec arrived heavy with rain. Izzy walked the perimeter at dusk, waterproof lamps slicing mist, confirming all seams intact. Inside, buds slept. Good. Tomorrow she would present the ministry with data, plead to classify the plant as provisional research subject rather than invasive. She rehearsed phrases: contained, beneficial, incipient, medical device. She brewed chamomile, listened to stormwater drum the roof. Midnight neared. That was when a flicker through the window made her mug halt halfway to lips. She hurried outside. Under the downpour, buds burst open, petals shining like wet velvet. 5 kilometers included the ministry hotel in Gold River, where Dr. Nader checked invoices and, according to colleagues, carried regret like a stone. Izzy pictured him alone in a rented room, blame gnawing his insomniac mind. The petals before her were mirrors. Someone, somewhere, wanted to stop their own need for breath. Her inspection began at Oitsu. If she left now, she might reach town by 01U. She climbed into her truck, headlights slicing dark. The road was slick, but urgency made her steady. At the hotel, she convinced a night clerk to let her knock on Nader's door. It opened after long minutes. The ecologist's eyes were rimmed red. "Dr. Kwok, it's after midnight." "I know," she whispered. "I think you need someone to talk to." He stared, lowered his gaze, stepped aside. They spoke until pale morning entered the curtains. He had lost a nephew to suicide 1 month earlier, he said, felt complicit in blocking what might have saved others. Raw words, raw silence. As dawn feathered clouds, he wept. Sometimes that's all a threshold needs: ears, presence. When Izzy left, his face looked both ravaged and lighter. She made it back to the cabin with 15 minutes to shower and lay out her records. The ministry SUV arrived on schedule. Dr. Nader stepped out first, eyes meeting hers with quiet acknowledgement. The officials walked the perimeter, clipboard questions sharp as hail. Izzy answered with graphs and soil sample logs, with the newest addition, photographs from Gold River's crisis response team showing every person aided since May, anonymized but time-stamped. 33 living testaments. The bureaucrats whispered, frowned, whispered more. Finally, one said, "Containment must be absolute. No touch with native ecosystems. Annual review." Izzy exhaled so hard her chest ached. Dr. Nader signed the temporary exemption. That night she sat by the tubs, petals closed and safe. She had not saved a species, she realized. She had accepted stewardship of a paradox. The plant could not roam free, yet could not be erased without erasing the futures of people like Ryan, like Nader's nephew, like countless unknown souls who might one day stand at the brink. She dug a trench around the array and poured reinforced concrete, a moat of human intention. Above, the sky churned with November wind. Izzy felt small, but not powerless. Biology had handed her a strange instrument. Responsibility meant learning its music without letting it drown the forest's older songs. In the months that followed, she and Paula developed a closed-loop system. Bloom sensors triggered anonymous pings to local clinics, allowing outreach teams to blanket the radius with mental health messaging. The plant's predictive power remained secret, its enclosure monitored by cameras and Izzy's daily vigilance. She germinated one seed in a hermetic lab at UVic, studying the chemical cascade that reacted to human sorrow. If she could isolate it, maybe a blood test or breathalyzer could someday provide the same warning without the ecological risk. One evening in February, as snow softened the evergreens, a single bud within the array parted. Izzy watched the blue unfurl, felt the familiar sting of urgency, and logged the coordinates. While Paula's team mobilized, Izzy stood beneath the row of lights, raincoat dusted with flurries, and reached out to touch a petal. Cool, faintly slick. Living empathy, she thought, though that was projection. Likely it was just chemistry. Yet something about the flower felt aware, or maybe it was simply that Izzy was aware in its presence, aware of the fragile weave that tethered human minds to tomorrow, aware of ecosystems that could break without ever making a sound, aware of every choice vibrating outward like concentric rings in water. She withdrew her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Not for blooming, but for reminding her that science was never only about what could be done. It was about what should be done, and what must be protected while doing it. A snowflake landed on the petal, melted, and slid away. Somewhere in the valley a phone was ringing, a voice answering, a life pausing on its precipice. And here, within steel walls under winter's hush, a blue flower stood watch, its signal captured, its roots contained, its purpose no longer confused but painstakingly, precariously clear.